Today, once again, we're going to go over just one verse, so it's a little easy, at least for you guys. It was not easy for me. How do I stretch one verse into 2-hour-long session? So I thought I had this great idea. What if I use memes? Speak with the people in their own language. And I was very kindly talked down from that by my wife. But I'm going to use one anyway. And it's a multi-purpose tactic for me because I know we have a pattern of sitting further and further back every time. In order for you to see this meme, you got to get up, move up here, see it, and then, just out of comfort, just sit down wherever's nearest to you, I don't think it's going to work because I know you guys. I've been serving the youth for, almost 10 years. So maybe I'll just post the meme on the group me and we'll get over that. But should I give it a shot, Dennis? Or, man, I'm going to be hated. Some exercise for people. All right. Watch some of you have really good vision and you don't even have to. We got some people. Okay. Just a little. I'll give you guys a little bit. Oh.
That's Dennis when he wakes up.
Oh, wow. That's just cheating. No zooming.
Saved to my folder.
Okay. All right, and just take a seat nearby. No one's going to bite. It's just a picture. That's what memes are, right? I'm learning. All right. Well, that didn't work. Everyone went back. Whatever. We got 2. That's progress in my book. Camp fee is not covered, sorry. Okay. So in the continuation on the Sermon on the Mount series, we are looking at the Beatitudes. And notice how they are not the do attitudes, they are the be attitudes. This is about the state of mind. And the Gospel of Matthew is giving this emphasis on Jesus being the promised Messiah and King, but not the way the Jews expected. Instead, as a lowly figure and not one of power and majesty. So when Jesus begins preaching on the coming kingdom of heaven, and these are the characteristics that describe the citizens of God's kingdom, there's kind of an upset for the people that are of that mind. Because there's a huge contrast that Jesus is making with this sermon. Oh man, I don't know what's going on. It keeps reloading and taking me to the top. Does anyone know what I can do? Refresh it? Save it. I'll just restart every 3 minutes. Oh, okay. There we go. See, but I don't know if it's going to do it again. Scroll down. So there's this contrast with what was expected. And in terms of the law of God, he basically tells the Pharisees that their standard isn't even close to good enough. And it did it again. God has been testing me this week. Just read faster, you said. It says it's trying to connect. Maybe I need your hotspot. See, it did it again. That's the problem. It's cutting out my network. Nice. Jesus is working through you today.
My password is?
Wait, where is it?
Should be my name.
Oh, right there. Guys, do you want to know his password? Jesus rocks or something.
Jesus rocks, dollar signs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Uh-oh, hold on. Did it connect? Hang on. Okay, that should work. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so we see this stark contrast. And I think that was Jesus' goal. In fact, one of the most beautiful parallels I ever heard about was about this passage. And it's this comparison to when Moses in the Old Testament would come down from the mountain transcribing the law of God. And here we have Jesus coming up on the mountain and explaining the law of God, where God spoke in thunder in the midst of a great cloud with smoke and lightning. Jesus here speaks calmly. God is now in the flesh, speaking with a small, almost vulnerable voice. He is personable, approachable. Where the people were ordered to stay away from Mount Sinai, and in fear and trembling, they begged Moses, don't let him talk to us, don't let him see us, like you do your thing in the mountain, because if we see him, if we interact with God, surely we will die. But here, Jesus, in contrast, invites his disciples to draw near, and anyone else who will listen. So take from that what you will, but it's clear from the start that Jesus is different, and he's here to upset some people, in a sense, namely the Pharisees and legalists. And maybe that's why he began with the attitudes, the inner portion of our life, because the Pharisees, they valued highly and believed so strongly in external things because they were beautiful in their own eyes, proud of themselves, boasting in all of the things they could show others. But here the Beatitudes deal with the inner self, our attitude toward ourselves, toward our sin, toward God, toward the world, and so on. And it's crazy to me how much he packed into this little verse. It's almost like it's coming from the very mouth of God or something. But Jesus' words have been studied for a long, long time. And when he speaks, the oceans and the mountains listen. All of creation stops in awe and reverence, in hopeful anticipation. So let me ask you this. Question one. Who came to see Jesus? Was it the artists and poets, the rich and respected, the mighty and enduring? Who clung most to the word of Jesus? Was it not the poor? Was it not the broken, the struggling, the abandoned, the hurt? amidst the Pharisees and intellects and debaters and those envious of his abilities and massive following, amidst them were the weak, the desperate, the guilt-ridden, the sick and tired, down to their last hope. They pushed up against the crowd, if only just to see him. If I could just touch his cloak. That is the attitude of the people Jesus is here to preach to. And he's building up this portrait for the whole world, bringing us to this crescendo in the book of Matthew, at least, building up this picture that he is going to be the fulfillment of the law. That the burden of being good enough is no longer on you. That you trying to uphold, and when you can't uphold his standard, you make your own laws and you pivot and you outwork this end to fix this end, and all kinds of things that people would try to do to try to appease God in their own eyes. And when God raises this standard, where we might say, I'm not a killer or an adulterer, he explains the law and says, in your heart you have committed genocide. For you have hated your brother, and that is the root of your sin against God. In your heart you've cheated. You have stolen when you coveted your neighbor. You have blasphemed against God with your idols. Jesus lays people out, leveling the entire world. Because he says, riches are nothing to God. Be poor in spirit. The physical is just temporary. The proud harm everyone around them. They'll be humbled, and great will be their fall. Be meek. The cheerful and the pleasure-seeking will not be content. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Those who are filled up by the things of this world will not be satisfied. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. When you are immovable, arrogant, unwilling to forgive, you do not understand your place before a holy and perfect God who has offered you true mercy. Jesus isn't just interpreting and expounding on the kingdom of heaven. He's reestablishing its order. He's starting from scratch. He's reestablishing its principles, its practices, and its purpose. In a way, he's offering a close to the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, where, for example, it was once established the need for a high priest to make sacrifices of animals in order to cleanse the people. That was the way to get clean. And now he's building up to say that there is one high priest. That practice was only a shadow, only a temporary fix. That he is the true version of what God intended to be the ultimate, all-time sacrifice for sin. One that perfectly satisfies God, not just with one animal or whatever else we can offer. It is here where we learn, or the world learned, that God's plan never involved you trying to work it out. He didn't give you the law so that you would try to fulfill it and meet his standard. He gave you the law so that you could see your heart, that you could see that you do not measure up to God's standard of holiness, perfection, that you have no right to enter heaven. That was the purpose of the law. And like the Pharisees, we mistook it to something to be accomplished, something to, if I do well in it, I can boast in. And he continues to build with this crucial truth: blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. If those people who are burdened, struggling in their inner being, hear Jesus describing the new life, describing the character of the citizens of heaven, could you imagine what they felt? To never feel guilt again. To love selflessly. Meaning without reservation, without selfish motives. To desire good always. He's talking about a perfectly cleansed heart. Every blemish wiped away. Every bad motive washed by his blood. Your stone heart made soft again. Pure in the sight of the judge of the living and the dead, whose piercing omniscience pierces the heart and thoughts. Imagine having no thing to hide before him. That is true freedom. Not these temporary fixes, not these external washings. That would be the day. And obviously that's a reality of the future. But that doesn't mean that it isn't important for us to study and implement now, by the power of the Spirit, all of these things that Jesus teaches us about his citizens. My sermon today incorporates 3 major themes: purity, the inner heart, and seeing God. Purity, the inner heart, and seeing God. And honestly, I don't know how it always works out with the sermons I prepare, but there's no better time in my life for this to be the theme. This last Friday, it was my birthday. And no, I'm not turning 87 or 97 or 107. I'm turning 20 and 7. But I think Yulia can attest to this. Actually, my physical engine this week has been like on the verge of red for a couple of days. I've just been scrambling, running, working on everything, to the point where at work I had a pebble in my boot that I felt, but I didn't take a moment to stop and get it out until the end of my shift. Hustling. Sometimes life's like that. But thankfully, I have a supportive wife who allowed me to write and study for this every chance that I got. But there was another moment that got me through it. And it was when my grandpa gave me his annual follow-up of like, hey, you're still alive, congrats, that kind of thing. You guys go through that, right? No? Dude, that's actually sad. I actually talked to my little brother about this, and he was always so upset. He's like, oh, it's such a burden to like, I'm going to have to hear his stories, and I'm going to like, compliment, like everything, and like kind of be patient throughout it all. And I was like, dude, most people never know their grandpa or never got a chance to even have a call with them, but he's actually so devoted, and he used to send cash, but that's gone because of inflation. But still, I got a phone call from him, and some context, his wife had passed away 10 years, so my grandpa, or my grandma, and he really caught me off guard because, one, he's dating again. I'm not ready to talk about it. And two, he started telling me, without asking me about anything about my life or anything that's going on, he just started going list maybe he has like a prompter or something, and he tells it to all his grandsons and everything, but he just started reading off the gospel. He started telling me all the good things in my life that I had, from my parents to being married, having work, church community. And I sat there and I listened, and I was taken aback. Because it's all you need sometimes, you know? Things aren't so bad. But when he was reading to me the gospel, I was just so stunned. Because we go through this cycle of things to fix, things to do, things to sort out, people to see. And it's almost like the cycle of disaster to speed bump to challenge, and all you focus on is just what's the next thing I got to do or take care of. And you stop and you realize, like, I've been blessed, as I'm sure you have too, even though I don't know your story or what's going on in your life. I know that all those speed bumps, all the things immediately in your vision of sight, on your heart, that those obstacles, the pain, the confusion, all of that disappears in context. And as you get older, there's less and less that captivates your heart than the day that you will see God. There's so much freedom in having the right perspective. And the weight of burden that the Lord takes off of you graciously and over again is immeasurable. So let's talk about purity and having the right perspective. If there's any mark for a true believer, a true Christian, a follower of God, it is that they would be pure in heart. Where in this life the Holy Spirit leads us in cleanliness. Where we'll one day be made completely pure, perfect in our motives, our morals, and our behaviors, and so on. Pure here being the word katharos, which can be interpreted as clean, blameless, unstained from guilt, and furthermore can be interpreted as being purified by fire or by pruning. And if we look to the Old Testament, we'll see the idea of purification as a new covenant God has with us, where He'll live within us as the source of our power to renew, as the source of the new heart that is our flesh, that we will live by the Spirit, and that will cause us to walk in newness of life. If we look at Ezekiel 36, all of these things are incorporated. Ezekiel 36, verse 25. It says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleanlinesses. And from all your idols I will cleanse you. And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. Purity, having many components to it, is a necessity in God's plan. There's no way around it. There's no makeup course if you neglected this aspect in your life. Because nothing unclean will enter heaven. Sin will never even look at heaven. It will be so far separated. And so if this is talking about the pruning and the refining through fire by the work of the Spirit, it is God at work in us to teach us His morals and to give us the power to keep in step with his statutes and laws. He didn't say, I'll give you a seal of your salvation and that's it. You're good to go. There's a fulfillment that takes place, a practice, a lifelong journey of sanctification, of sacrificially putting off the fleshly, sneaky, self-serving behaviors and loves that you have. So there's this purity in terms of moral cleanliness. There's another form of purity that has to do with devotion. It's a freedom from hypocrisy. It's a freedom from double-mindedness, playing both fields, having two masters, having an inconsistent morality and obedience. Could you imagine if a king opened up his home for all the citizens to enter, but they had no relations to him? They disagreed with his moral laws. They had hidden agendas, self-serving schemes. They were looking for ways to take his place or gain some kind of riches or recognition. It doesn't work. No king would allow that. That kingdom can't stand because it's divided. And so, in contrast, there's this unifying spirit, a combined purpose, a cohesive design, harmony, like-mindedness, where we share the same characteristics. If we're all looking to one ruler, would he not be reflected in all of us? His teachings and his behavior would mold us, first through our imitation, but then through our acknowledgement, our agreement, our study of him, and the process of growth. The way of putting off the old self and the old ways to progressively be something new that shares one identity. And thus, here is how we can have fellowship with God, fellowship with one another. That's his goal, to make you like Christ and have the same fellowship he has with Christ with you for eternity. That's the master plan. And Paul reminds two churches that I know of, don't you know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? A single rotten apple spoils the bunch. Car without a wheel is a dump. I don't know what else rhymes, but he says to the Corinthians, basically, you're so arrogant. He didn't say that specifically, but he said, you're protecting these people who have sinned. You're tolerating sin in the church, and you don't even see it as a threat. Allowing it would be devastating to your church. And yet you're allowing that little leaven to corrupt the entire community. And with the Galatians, same thing. The Jewish Christians set up these obstacles of legalism, confusing believers and hindering their spiritual development. And they had stopped obeying the truth, and they allowed the influence of others to corrupt people, corrupt their character. And so there is no harmony when you have two masters. There's disunity through hypocrisy, because purity is corruptible, and it doesn't take much, and it's amplified by hypocrisy, and especially negligence. And so the pure in heart must put away any and all corruption. Even in the same sermon, Jesus says, if your hand or your feet cause you to sin, to stumble, cut them off in order to save the body. That's the principle here. And isn't that the very fundamental of pruning? Being refined, to forfeit these things that you don't need and to make something new, something better. And Jesus is saying you don't get to that through rituals and ceremonies and extra classes. It starts in your heart. Hypocrisy could also be a person living morally but treating God as nothing. That we could say, I would never hurt people or rob people, but I don't really know how that affects God, or I don't really care what He thinks about it. A person can be moral but unjust in their heart, nor will they ever see God or a need for God or a need for Christ's sacrificial death. Nor will they see a problem of sin. They'll have their own motivations for keeping cleanliness, like human affirmation. Or they might say, why can't God just let sin go? Just forgive everybody. Jesus doesn't even have to die. And there's this huge debate about this doctrine where people argue like Jesus didn't have to die. God is so almighty and powerful, He could just wipe the slate clean. But that is the wrong thinking. Because if you've ever felt the weight of sin against you, where you faced evil and you were brokenhearted because you were defiled by that sin, you would agree that justice must take place in this world. God's wrath against all mankind is justified because He has been wronged through every sin, day in and day out. So even the moral deserve death in God's eyes because all have sinned and rebelled against Him. And that doctrine is so important because I was reading Spurgeon and he said, those who recognize the weight of the law and why it's important and just, they see the need for Christ to fulfill the law and not just dismiss everything. We can't even begin to see the fullness of the gospel, the hope that is in it, the magnitude of what God has done, if we can't open our heart to recognize this is precisely what we need. And so the purest hearted people are those who have rejoiced to see God's righteous law vindicated and magnified by Christ's death on the cross. Basically, if you don't see the difficulty of what God had to do in punishing and sacrificing His Son in your place, then you do not have a pure heart. You do not have a just heart. You do not have the heart of God, who is pained by the sin. Likewise, the impure in heart cannot see any need of being born again, of being walked through regeneration. If his heart was pure, he would realize that his nature has been evil from the beginning. He would see jealousies, murders, rebellions within his heart. He would cry out to be delivered from himself. What he's saying is those who are pure in heart, they're going to recognize the injustices of this world, even if they are moral or have been for a long time or are moral in their own eyes. He's basically saying that it doesn't matter because your nature has always rebelled against God. And you have defiled in every way. You have stolen and cheated and killed and everything else. Spurgeon continued and he said, "As for you who are pure in heart, what do you now think of your old nature? Is it not the heavy burden that you continually carry about with you? Is not the plague of your own heart the worst plague under heaven? Do you not feel that the very tendency of sin or to sin is a constant grief to you, and that if you could only get rid of it altogether, your heaven would have begun below? So it is the pure in heart who see the doctrine of regeneration, and those who do not see it because they are impure in heart." Basically, the more I sin and the more I know the weight of my sin, the more I ought to see my need for God. That is the pure heart that doesn't look to itself or doesn't cloud or protect itself by saying, "I'm not as bad as those." That is unjust to a holy and perfect God. And this, again, is the contrast of Christ in his teaching. And it is a reminder that being pure in heart, refined, showcases to us and to the world the vast degree of separation from the old, the vast degree of what Christ has done. There's yet another kind of purity, and it's probably, these are all starting to blend together, but a person might read the Bible, right? Is it possible for them to not see God? You might even literally see a passage that mentions God and not see God. Why is that? Because when they read, they don't read to see what God might have to say on a certain subject. They read until they find enough to bend and sway God's word to back up their own views and opinions and values. They don't seek the truth, therefore they cannot see God. There has to be a certain openness and integrity when subjecting oneself to God's workmanship, to his word. Perhaps there's another form of purity. The form of purity that's of innocence and sincerity. In other countries foreign to ours and in old times, the ruling kings and queens were rarely ever seen, especially by commoners and outsiders. They lived in seclusion, and to have an audience with them was a task beyond your means. But there would be some who would plot and plan, scheme, and find backward ways to try and see the king. But Jesus is clear about this. That's not the way to see God. No amount of effort or physical turmoil or offerings, no matter who you know, how much wealth you attain, what talents you might offer this king with the capital K, you will never have access to him. John says that no one has ever seen God, and Jesus says that the only way to him is through his Son, and they are one. So there's this sort of meekness, humility in the type of purity that I'm talking about, where we're compared to children. Where Jesus says, "Let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belong the kingdom of God." And it's this purity that's like an attitude of helpless dependence on God. There is a pure motive in the approach to God. Not maneuvers and plans of action, but just a desire for Him. That's all He asks. He doesn't ask you for the things you've attained or your riches. He just asks you to look to Him, to trust in Him. And even the phenomenon of being born again implies that we are like children to Him. And if one is not born again, we cannot see the kingdom. And so where we learn to walk with Him again, we learn to talk again as children with fresh perspective, complete dependence on Him. That's the kind of purity, not offerings and flash, simply asking. We move on to the inner heart. If purity is about single-mindedness, freedom from hypocrisy and freedom from corruption, having moral consistency and obedience, having an openness to God's sovereign ruling, having harmony and honesty with God, forfeiting the fleshly, sneaky, self-serving behaviors and loves, then the heart is the cornerstone to purity. The heart's the conductor that steers and governs everything about you. It decides your whole identity, the objects of your affections, who and what you love, who and what you hate, what you trust, what you worry about, how you live, how you speak, how you deal with conflict, how you receive good news, how you receive bad news. It's the most important thing for you to safeguard, to work on, to guide. So will you give it over for God's rule? Will you protect it from media, from friends, from idols, if that's what it takes? From the doctrines of this world, the lusts of health and wellness. In His preaching, Jesus is confronting mankind. The obsessions we have with outward, physical, temporary things. And this contrast is there to help us deal with all of life's twists and turns and how God deals with them and gives us perspective to deal with them. He didn't say, "Blessed are the pure in language. Blessed are the pure in action. Blessed are the pure in ceremonies, in rule keeping, in good works." He didn't say these things. He said, "Blessed are the pure in heart." And if your actions appear to be pure, but the motive of your heart is self-serving, what good is it for you or for others or for God? If your language is clean, but the imaginations and the desires of your heart are filthy, which will you be judged by? According to man, you will be admired, respected, loved, appreciated. Because mankind looks to the outward. But the Lord will be broken to watch His children running after things they don't belong touching. He looks to the heart. And even though man has made every effort to try to affect the heart, to try to fix everything, even washing their babies with water in hopes that they'll become children of God, in hopes that they'll be inheritors of the kingdom of heaven, how absurd is that to God? Outward washings, all our attempts to try to chisel away at the marble to get to the soft heart, that's no plan at all. We can't make out of marble a living and breathing fleshly heart. And we might think, that's not me either. I don't do that. I don't practice rituals and customs, learned behavior, cultural adoptions of forms and practices. Not me. Let me remind you that legalism takes many, many forms, where we might follow the letter of the law, but completely miss on the spirit of the law, where we don't care about what the law was meant to accomplish or what it's actually about. We care about fulfilling that thing, like going to church on Sunday. We don't necessarily go sometimes for edification and fellowship. We go out of a guilt. But if Jesus was here, he would say, like, well, I don't know what he would say. I don't want to speak for Jesus. But he would ask you through me, I guess, right now, like, what if you're sick and you can't go to church? Or if you do go to church, you'll spread something. I don't know. The point isn't that you are so devoted to, you go to church and you do the things and you're there and you check things off your list and you say hi to the right people and then you dip. That's missing the point of the Sabbath. Just like the Pharisees missed the point when, if you're helping someone and you move your body in a certain way, you just broke a law. Shame. There's actually, I think, in New York, a place, I think it's a certain sect of Jews. They set up a fishing line around this border for their fulfillment of the law. That basically means, like, you can't leave your house with something, like your keys or whatever. And I'm paraphrasing or whatever. But basically, they made this outline to kind of become part of their house so that they could go out to the little river or whatever outside of their house so they could fish on Sunday or whatever day is their Sabbath. Does that make sense? Like, I don't agree with the law, so I'm going to extend the field of what it incorporates so that I could go fishing on my Sabbath. That is missing the point. Ligonier, they have a blog and a really good article on this. The legalist isolates the law from God, or isolates the law from the God who gave the law. He is not so much seeking to obey God or honor Christ as he is to obey rules that are devoid of any personal relationship. There's no love, joy, life, or passion. It's a rote, mechanical form of law-keeping that we call externalism. The legalist focuses only on obeying bare rules, destroying the broader context of God's love and redemption in which he gave his law in the first place. Basically saying that every time we do something in the church or with our families in the name of God that isn't a product of the Holy Spirit, we are practicing legalism. That we're practicing these mechanical forms of doing things in the name of God, but they don't mean anything in our hearts. The church doesn't need your poems and your services if you don't honor God through them. They are, in the Old Testament, described as filthy rags to God. And we bind ourselves to extra biblical things like dancing or alcohol consumption or wearing pants in church and all of these rules that our conscience is binded to, and we think, okay, we've gone the extra mile to be holy, but what has it served? Has it made God proud? Have you been able to see God because of these things? And that's our third and final thing, and I'll be short, but Jesus wanted to deal with the matters of the heart the source of all evil, of all the sinful thoughts, words, and actions. He wanted to deal with the heart so that we could see God and to see the importance of that. When I was talking about the monarchies coming to see the king, there were certain ministers who had access to him at all times, or queen, or whoever. They had a boldness. They had freedom. And I think Jesus is presenting the same freedom to us, that when we are cleansed by his blood, that we have this right, this boldness to go before him, to pray to him and commune with him. And not only that, but become ministers of his, ambassadors, servants, to carry out his most honorable errands. And he keeps these people close, protects them, listens to them, nurtures them, trains them, builds them up, makes them rich in the truest sense. That sounds important and noble. And it's not just the final day, but now it is a living reality to us. As seeing God is a synonym for having intimate knowledge with him. Not that we have to see him physically, but we know him, that we have intimacy with him, closeness to him, that we can call him Abba, Papa, Father. The pure in heart see God in creation. They see him in circumstances. They see him in his word. They see him in nature. They see him in the church. And they will see him in heaven. The worship team can come up. The pure in heart can see God everywhere. That meme that I was trying to show you guys, that is what it is like to be impure in our sight, in our heart. That all we have is this blinder of money or friendships, how many followers we can have. We become blinded to the covetousness of our hearts. So what God is trying to do is to rescue you from what has captivated you. You have been held captive to riches and feelings, comfort, control, and so on. And he comes to rescue. And when you see the rains and the leaves blossoming again and everything, I pray that you will see God. And you will hear his voice in the storms. That you will see God in the deepest caverns of the sea. When you're lonely in the desert, when you look upon the stars, and when you read his pages, you will see him. Instead of looking for reasons to doubt or have controversy or debate, all you will see is grace. You will stop questioning all the human components and the authenticity and the historical significance, and all you will see is the Spirit leading you, working in you, that he has not left you. And you will not see the church as this divided place with a bunch of different sects and groups. That you won't look at them with faults and divisions. Church is just a place for failures and people who are imperfect, but me, I'm good. They're all hypocrites, but me, I'm good. But instead, you will come to church to see him in your brothers and sisters, to rejoice in the things he has done, to make note, to stop, like the mountains and the oceans, to observe His glory. That you will see more than just glimpses of what He does in the nature, in church, and scriptures, but that historically you will see Him blended, all His characters together, the good, the just, the beautiful God who has made you, counted your days, thought of every aspect in your life, everything you will come into, everything you will see and feel and cherish and love, how you will feel loved. All of these things give us sight into who God is, the richness of His glory and grace. Not the wise man, not the rich, not the conservative. No one gets to see Him, but the people who just want Him with desperation to touch His cloak, to hear His words, the pure in heart.